Well, Game of Thrones is over. That honestly feels a little bit weird to say that. It's been over for a bit now, I know, but it seems pretty apparent that the final season has been pretty divisive, to say the least. And I kind of want to give my thoughts on the season and maybe some extra thoughts about the show as a whole. I have a lot of things to say here, both positive and negative, so let's get this thing started. And yeah, there are going to be spoilers for the whole show because, duh. So here's how this is going to work. This isn't going to be some big rant video or Twitter-inspired rampage on the creatives involved in the show. I actually liked quite a lot of what they did in the final season, for the record, which we will get into in a bit. That being said, there were several elements of the season which do not work for me, or rather that I didn't enjoy. So here's how we're going to do this. This video is going to be a compliment sandwich. If you don't know what that is, it's a technique of providing feedback while managing to not come off as a gigantic asshole to the person you're trying to critique. Basically, you start with praise, then you go through the critiques, then you close with some more praise. It's actually super easy, and it's something that a lot of you folks out there shouting your thoughts on Twitter could probably benefit from. Starting with the nice stuff, bread number one. Let's knock out the easy stuff super quickly. Cinematography, special effects, costume design, set design, directing, acting, and everything else on the production side of the show were absolutely spectacular, and some of the best of the entire series. I don't really know how you can argue with any of that. Game of Thrones has been consistently one of the best looking things on television for years now. I'll also make the case that the first half of this season was pretty nearly flawless, with episode 2 being the strongest of the whole season. I really love moments like this, what Lord of the Rings called the deep breath before the plunge.
It's so quiet.
It's the deep breath before the plunge.
Sort of the last moment of calm before the big showdown. The whole fireplace sequence with characters looking back at their journeys, Podrick's musical beat set to everyone's last looks before the war, and Brienne being knighted by Jaime were all deeply satisfying moments. Overall, I really enjoyed the battle against the White Walkers as well. I would have done a couple things differently, which I'll discuss later, but I thought it was mostly a solid battle episode with some pretty awesome visuals sprinkled in there. I didn't have the problem people seem to have had with the episode being too dark, so I can't really complain about that. I actually rewatched it in the middle of the day with the sun shining in my room, so I'm not really sure what happened for people. The only time I've actually had trouble seeing scenes from this episode is when watching YouTube videos of people complaining about how dark it is, actually. Story-wise, though, I feel that both Jorah and Theon received pretty fitting and emotional final scenes for their arcs. Jorah should only ever have been sent out defending Dany. I didn't expect him to make it this far, honestly, or to be defending her from undead ice monsters, but it works. And Theon dying in an attempt to protect Bran, who previously had held him as a prisoner and threatened to kill him, served as the ultimate redemption for him. Arya's little side quest through the interior of Winterfell was an excellent and tension-filled sequence, and I love that it's her danger that snaps the Hound out of his panic-induced shutdown. The dragon battle between Jon, Dany, and the Night King was also super fun and pretty visually stunning, in my opinion. I thought moments like the Dothraki charge, with all their lights disappearing into the darkness, was a pretty great way to set the stage for the enormity of the force about to attack. Does it make sense from a strategy perspective? No, but it still fulfilled its function narratively. One other element I really enjoyed from the early episodes is that not everyone is getting along perfectly despite them working together. It would have been very anti-Game of Thrones for everyone to just suddenly be friends or have a clean alliance. These characters have generations of distrust built up between their families. They're all big enough people to band together for now, except for her, but that doesn't heal all old wounds. I also greatly enjoyed all the reunion moments, most notably Arya's reunions with Jon, Gendry and the Hound, Jaime and Bran, and Tyrion and Sansa. It was really satisfying to see these characters reunite after years of them being apart, and seeing just how much each of them have grown from the last times they were together. This is especially true when the journeys the characters went on were often kickstarted by each other. These are the types of things I like to see in the final stretches of a story. Now let's jump into my gripes with the final season, the sandwich filling part of this video. Let's start with my biggest problem that I have, Dany's fall from grace. Now, it doesn't seem like this is really an unpopular opinion out there, but I am definitely not a fan of where this character ended up. I do have some issues with other people's reasons for disliking this twist as well, though, which I will touch on in addition to laying out my own issues. For me, I'm not upset about this turn for the character because it was rushed or anything like that. There was enough established within the story to say that she could go down a darker path if events occurred in certain ways. Going off the rails to this extent, though, is absolutely out of character. If I'm being honest, though, I don't think there was a way they could have had her turn bad that I would have been okay with. They could have done it over the course of 2 full-length seasons, and it would not have mattered to me. I'm just not into it. And I understand this is a personal preference for this bit, but unless I know going in, I'm really not interested in downfall stories, especially for characters that I've been watching build themselves over such a long time. It's defeatist to me, and I don't feel overwhelmingly compelled to consume defeatist content. Now, before I dive into my deeper issues with this story and some alternatives I would have found more interesting, I want to address the biggest criticism of this turn, that it was rushed. Now, I won't deny at all that the last 2 seasons are significantly faster in their pacing. Characters get across the continent within the span of an episode, where it used to take sometimes a full season. That being said, those of you who think they reached their destination more quickly within the world of the show, come on, seriously? Your imagination really can't process the concept that time has passed. We've been told how long it takes to get between a lot of these places before. Guess what? That's the amount of time that has passed in the show between when they got from point A to point B. Okay, back to the point here. Dany turning bad and burning people wasn't so much rushed as it was hitting a crescendo in the final set of episodes. Yeah, the final nails in the coffin for this heel turn happened pretty quickly, which is honestly probably what put her over the edge. In the span of 2 weeks, yes, it was 2 weeks, she lost her closest friend and advisor, one of her dragon/children, another close friend, her right of succession to the throne, and her new boyfriend. Now, I'm not saying that having her go off the rails and burn a city full of innocents was the right move. I don't think it was, and I will get there. All I am saying is that the character groundwork was mostly laid there and wasn't so rushed. I mean, you have this massive amount of loss in a short period of time at the end, but her solution to all these problems since day one has been to burn them all away. Miri Mazdur lies to you about bringing your husband back after possibly poisoning him in the first place. Burn her. Warlocks want to keep you in Karth. Burn them. Krasnus wants to keep your dragon in exchange for the army of Unsullied. Burn him. Wise Master is giving you trouble. Burn him. Dothraki calls threaten you. Burn him. Tarleys won't bend the knee. Burn them. Now, we have excused nearly all of these actions because, quite frankly, fuck those people. Except Dickon. He was a pretty nice dude. They wronged her, and she was pursuing justice and liberation. Go her. However, after a certain amount of time burning people, you become someone who's just kinda comfortable burning people. I also never totally bought into what Dany was preaching because her 2 goals were fundamentally contradictory to each other. So, she says she means to go to Westeros and break the wheel, but her other motivation is to sit on the Iron Throne, or, as I'll call it here, the motherfucking wheel.
The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels on the bus go round and round, all through the town.
Now, I assumed for years that this was something that she would eventually realize and that the series would end with her having abolished the existing Westerosi monarchy, which, I mean, kind of happened, but whatever. It wasn't done by her. Again, I'm just saying this shit wasn't quite so rushed as people like to say. I don't actually like it because Dany knew this stuff about herself and took steps over the years to overcome this tendency that she had allegedly inherited. Like, that was the point of her naming Tyrion her hand, right? She surrounded herself with people who could check her worst impulses.
She knows herself. She chose an advisor who would check her worst impulses instead of feeding them. That's the difference.
Dude, I just said that. But, I mean, she knew her family legacy and wanted to be better.
I am not here to be Queen of the Ashes.
Well, I'm sorry, Dany, but that's what happens when you burn the whole goddamn city down. So what happened? Just in this example, listening to Tyrion here and allowing the Tarleys to take the Black would have been a good move. Create some goodwill with Sam, who would then become Lord of Horn Hill if you chose to allow it, creating a solid political ally. Not that she knew about Sam at this point, but the advice was still sound and would have been a net positive for her in the long run. Now, I understand that Tyrion's advice inexplicably got worse over the last 2 seasons, but why was that the choice the writers, and from now on I'm including George R. R. Martin here too, because this is allegedly how the books are going to go down as well, decide this was the best course for the story to take? So, with that said, here are some alternative ideas for how this could have gone down that I think are more in line with the character. The first one here is the most minor alteration to the existing story. Most everything goes down the same all the way to the point where Dany starts torching the city. Her friend died. She wants revenge. She briefly forgets herself and takes out her anger on those on which she has the power to. But unlike the show, where she mercilessly torches people for hours and seemingly has no concept of why that was wrong, here, she stops and snaps out of it. She remembers the type of ruler she wants to be and stops herself. The tragedy comes when we all realize it's too late. Her dragonfire set off a chain reaction of wildfire caches left by her father, sort of a sins of the father returning to haunt the daughter thing. She flies around the city, desperate for a way to stop what's happening, but obviously she can't. The damage is done. So we know that she isn't the Mad Queen flying around burning up everything. But our heroes on the ground don't know this. You can then have the ending play out more or less the same, with Tyrion denouncing her, Jon killing her, Bran succeeding her, but the feeling is now much more devastating because they were operating under false information. This would be a far darker tragedy than the one we got, but would manage to maintain Dany's character. It might damage Tyrion and Jon, though. Probably would spend more time workshopping this concept before committing to it on screen. You could also veer off from the show's path, though, and have Dany not be killed. She gets a chance to come clean to the others, but they decide together that she can no longer be the ruler the people need after what most people think she did. So she flies away on Drogon into exile, never to be seen again. Are either of these options perfect? No, obviously not, but I think there's solid story potential in both. Now, my next idea would be to have Cersei frame her with wildfire. That way Dany doesn't go all crazy town on Kingsville, and Cersei actually has some action in the final season rather than just standing at her window. Don't have a ton of detail for this idea, sorry folks, but before moving on though, this would have solved a problem with another character too, Cersei. She did essentially nothing for the entire season, and I understand her not being involved in episodes 2 and 3, but I was hoping she had something up her sleeve for the back half of the season, you know? This would have given Cersei a more active role in the final confrontation despite her not physically moving around very much. Now, I'm really just bummed out by Dany's ending because I've been rooting for this girl for like 10 years at this point, and have always really liked and admired her character. Yeah, she's flawed and a bit hypocritical, but almost every character in this series is. That's kind of part of the point. And while I recognize that idealist liberators can eventually slide into tyranny, it's not something I wanted to see for Daenerys. I feel like she deserved better. So did Grey Worm on that note. Boy, did he become a huge dick as soon as Missandei died. And speaking of deserving better...
Who's that?
Jaime fucking Lannister.
For a long time now, Jaime Lannister has been one of my favorite characters on the show. Kind of shocking how popular the writing was able to make him when his first notable act on screen was this.
The things I do for love.
But he's an incredibly deep and dynamic character, and watching him grow into a good man who owns up to his mistakes was immensely satisfying. Which is why him returning to Cersei to be with her at the end is so disappointing. Now again, I have to outline my read on his behavior in episodes 4 and 5 before I get into the issues here. One big thing is that I don't actually believe him when he says this shit to Brienne and Tyrion about him not being good. My take is that he has this urge to go back and be with his sister, even though he knows that she's bad for him and he will die doing this. So, to follow this urge, he tells himself that he is this terrible person who doesn't care about others to convince himself that he doesn't deserve the happiness that he has found. He stumbled into a life where he seems to have earned some respect from these people who hated him, and he's with a loving partner for the first time in his life. Why would he throw all that away, he would ask himself. Because he's a hateful man, he would respond. Now, this is the kind of thought process I imagine him going through in this scene. We know this to be false, and everyone who knows him well also knows this, including Jaime, which would make this all the more tragic. He lost his honor because of a lie he allowed others to believe, and lost his life because of a lie he allowed himself to believe. I also don't read Brienne begging him to stay nearly as negatively as others do. Most people seem to read it as, don't leave me for another woman, but I read it as, don't throw your life away, you're better than this. Like, she knew going down to King's Landing would probably get him killed, and she didn't want him to die. Now, if you read this scene differently, whatever, do your thing, I don't care. Art is up to interpretation, but there doesn't have to be one definitive take on this scene or any other scene.
Like your sister. You're not. You're better than she is. You're a good man and you can't save her. You don't need to die with her. Stay here. Stay with me. Please. Stay.
I think I actually would have been totally fine with Jaime's decision to return to King's Landing if he realized his mistake once he got there and sort of remembered who it was he had become. That would be my other big tragedy at the end, Just as Dany makes a snap decision that negatively impacts her, Jaime does as well. Maybe he does also end up killing Cersei, as so many of us thought he would. Ultimately, though, Jaime deserved better from the end of his story. I do think that he has to die by the end, but not like this. Now, to complete the sandwich, let's move back to the things I enjoyed about the season. So, this last bit here is tough for me because while I said earlier that I dislike Dany's heel turn, which I definitely do, I really enjoyed a lot of the elements that came as a result of it. Everything happening on the ground in King's Landing after Dany snaps I found to be really tense and impressively made. Watching Jon struggle to maintain his honor while fighting for someone who just became a mass murderer and alongside his own men who just turned into pillaging rapists on a dime during the siege environment is engaging television. I think Kit Harington really sold this internal struggle well, and these last 2 episodes generally were solid showcases for Kit's acting ability. I also enjoyed Arya's escape through the city. Kind of reminded me of a disaster movie, just with, some deeper characters. And while we're here, the horse thing. I don't know why this became such a sticking point for people, but here's my read if you're interested. The horse is there to symbolize that even among so much death and destruction, sometimes life can endure. I really don't think there's much more to it than that, nor do I think there needs to be. If you're someone who wants everything like this directly spelled out for you, I guess you and I just have different preferences for storytelling. I like things left to interpretation sometimes. Tyrion confronting Dany after the fact and throwing away his badge was also immensely satisfying. Again, how we got here was not, but this moment felt good regardless. Drogon melting the Iron Throne and flying away with his mother was also a great moment. Now, this moment has gotten a lot of flack because dragons understand symbolism. Well, dumb shows, you're out of 10. But yeah, in this universe, they probably do. At least in the books, dragons are described as wicked smart and apparently capable of critical thought. Why didn't he kill Jon? I mean, I don't have a definitive answer, but my interpretation is that he himself was conflicted as he knew Jon and knew the connection to Dany. He probably also knew about Jon being a Targaryen. So, I don't find it a stretch to believe that Drogon was able to, at least in a basic sense, understand that it was the pursuit of this power taken too far that kills his mother, and in the end, he broke the symbolic representation of the wheel, fulfilling her stated goal. So, because of that, I think Dany's turn created a lot of interesting stuff, but as I listed out earlier, there are other ways to achieve similar results without breaking her character so drastically. Another element I really loved from the ending of the show was the Hound and Arya's final scene together. I thought it was perfectly poetic that she was redirected from the life of violence by the person who initially set her down that path. Their relationship was one of the strongest elements of the show for me when it was around, and I'm glad to see their dynamic end like this. I don't really understand people who think turning away from revenge is a detriment to her character either. Like, the point here is that the quest for revenge will consume and destroy her. This isn't an uncommon idea. He who seeks revenge should dig 2 graves. Ring a bell? The fact that the Hound sees himself as too far gone is tragic, but his compassion for Arya and unwillingness to let her live the life that he has and that he set her down shows us how much he has grown since our introduction to him.
The butcher's boy. You rode him down. He ran, but not very fast.
Could we have spent more time on this scene and seen more of a push-pull between the two of them? Yeah, sure, I'll give you that one, but I still found this scene moving and fitting. I also enjoyed Clegane Bowl. I was never someone who, needed to see this, but I was happy that my friends got what they wanted. That's cool. It was also a pretty visually cool fight, but I think it would have been more interesting if the Mountain still retained more of his personality. I found these scenes of Tyrion and Jon discussing Dany to be very engrossing and enjoyed how they really let the actors flex their performing muscles a bit. I felt that the endings for the remaining Starks were all pretty fitting too. Bran I'm a little bit on the fence about, but I'll get to that in a minute. I loved that Sansa became Queen of the North, although I didn't think the succession was really necessary. Arya leaving Westeros to explore seemed like the most fitting way to end her story, as she's left the quest for revenge behind. And Jon returning north of the Wall just felt right. As for Bran becoming king, I think it's interesting, despite Tyrion's flawed reasoning, who has a better story? Most of the people in this circle. The reason I think it is interesting, though, is that it's left pretty ambiguous to whether or not this is a good decision, and if Bran is even good himself at the end. Is he still Bran? Will he be a passive ruler? Will his ambivalence cause him to make more cruel decisions for his subjects? I personally enjoy that these questions are left unanswered, as it really allows for the future of Westeros to be up to our interpretation. In the spirit of leaving things open, too, I like that Drogon is still out there somewhere. What is he doing? Is he trying to bring his mother back to life? What could that mean for future events? I generally enjoy that not absolutely everything was tied up in a neat little bow. There's room for mental exploration about what comes next. I don't want to see it on screen. I just want to imagine it. Ultimately, I find the end of this show incredibly conflicting. As you can probably tell, there's a lot I really love and a lot I really hate. And the problem is, many of those things are intertwined within each other. So I don't really know what to make of the end of Season 8 and the ending of the show we got. Which leads me into the fun part. How, if I were in control, I would have done this season differently. So, will this maybe get a little too fan servicey? Maybe, yeah, but I really don't care. This is my thing. Before diving into this part, I want to say that I don't resent anyone who worked on this show for the end product they created. I think to do so would be pretty entitled, and I'm owed nothing here, really. I do genuinely believe that Dave and Dan thought they were writing the best version of the story. I disagree, but I don't think they were just trying to get it over with so they could go make Star Wars. I also don't absolve George of whatever blame is here either. This is probably more or less the ending we are getting in the books if he ever decides to finish them. I don't think he wants to do it anymore, honestly, and having read all of the published books, the books do sharply drop in quality for me after book 3. He's 3 for 5 on the books as far as I'm concerned, so I don't see it outside of the realm of possibility that he makes similar missteps in his novels. Again, not trying to throw shade here, books 4 and 5 just failed to keep my interest in the same way as the first 3. Something the show did manage to do despite some missteps in Season 5. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Episodes 1 and 2, they're going to be the same. I liked them. My first big changes are going to come in Episode 3 at the Battle of Winterfell. Most of it can be the same, but the key difference is that the battle is lost, causing all of our heroes to have to fall back. I'm making this change because I feel like the season as is felt a little disjointed, and I think it would have worked better if the storylines climax simultaneously at the end of the season. Basically, towards the end of Episode 3, all the surviving characters will be falling back away from Winterfell. Jon will have his fight with Viserion like he does in the show, but he will find a way to defeat him instead of just hiding behind a rock. This will give us one note of victory amongst the loss of a full battle. This will also add a new dynamic as the Night King will now be forced to stay on the ground going forward, giving more opportunity for interaction with our characters. Theon will sacrifice himself comparably to how he does in the show, but in my version, he's just buying Bran a couple more seconds to get picked up by Jon, Dany, and the dragons. The episode ends with Theon's death and a wide shot of our heroes fleeing a burning Winterfell. Maybe because they have to torch it to put the army of whites into a bit of chaos to buy themselves time to escape for some distance. Obviously, this change will mean we lose some of the stronger elements of Episode 4, those being the burial of the dead and the feast. And yeah, I'm sacrificing the feast, but we weren't actually losing the burial, it's just getting pushed back a little bit. We cold open on the Night King walking through the ruins of Winterfell as the sun rises. After a moment or two, he raises his arms and animates every corpse in and around the castle. This will, of course, include Jorah, Theon, Lyanna Mormont, Beric, and Ed. We then cut to our heroes on the march south, and I want this to feel a lot like the trek to Helm's Deep from the Two Towers, you know? You can even have some scouts from the Night King's army or something riding undead horses, harassing them and creating some small skirmish moments along the way. This march will take the majority of the episode, and we'll start to see Dany's paranoia grow a little bit as the others continue to look to Jon for guidance and leadership. At a certain point, the army crosses the Twins, and the dragons burn the bridge to buy them some more time. Obviously, the Night King will freeze a portion of the river eventually when he arrives, but it's a large body of water that might take some time to freeze, and there is still a significant distance between them and him. On the southern shore of the river, we'll have one of our quieter moments of the episode. Characters will have some time to mourn the fallen. Jon and Dany will have a variation of the talk they had in the original Episode 4, where Dany asked Jon to not share his heritage. And this will play out largely the same, but this is about all I'm keeping from Dany's original arc. Jon will also tell his family the secret, but we aren't going to get the same subsequent actions from them as we did in the show. I think instead of Sansa trying to remove Dany's legitimacy, the two should instead grow a begrudging bond and eventual respect. I would have them speak to each other. I'd have them bond over their struggles and becoming powerful women in a male-dominated world, feel each other's pain for the losses of Jorah and Theon, and look back to where they began as a girl sold into marriage and a child obsessed with the idea of marriage to a prince. I would then have Sansa tell Dany that she knows about Jon. Dany would initially recoil, but Sansa is different here than in the show. She explains to Dany that this makes her family, and now she's being genuine or playing a long con. At this point, we don't know. But she was a student of Littlefinger, so anything is possible. The next morning, their march continues. Throughout the episode, we're also cutting back to King's Landing to see what Cersei's up to. I'd like her to have some plan in place for dealing with her enemies rather than just sitting back and waiting. Have her, Euron, and Harry Strickland strategizing on how to deal with the oncoming threat. As the episode nears its conclusion, we can even see Cersei actually express some concern about the army of the dead finally, as it is fast approaching her now too. And at the end of the episode, our heroes make it to the outskirts of King's Landing and begin preparing for the final battle. I'm putting the final battle here due to the importance of the location for the show. Strategically, fighting at the Twins probably makes more sense, but there's no thematic relevance to that. The Trident would have been a good spot too, but it just hasn't been important enough in the show to be right for this. So, King's Landing makes the most sense for the show, and it allows us to have a climactic showdown that can include all of our remaining characters. At this time, I'd like to include an alternate version of the Jaime Brienne moment, but precipitated in a much smaller moment, more comparable to this from Season 1. Then, late at night after everyone is asleep resting, Jaime will sneak out of the camp, clearly in conflict with himself, and find his way into the city. For what reason? We're not sure yet. The episode ends with the army of the dead arriving at the Twins and the Night King freezing the river. The army then proceeds at a fast pace. The episode begins with our heroes ready for battle. They're far enough away from the city walls to not be bombarded by Cersei's forces. People notice Jaime is missing, and our main characters react differently based on their relationships to Jaime. Brienne seems mostly confused and betrayed. Tyrion tries to justify it to himself and others. Dany, of course, assumes he's betrayed all of them, and Jon doesn't really react much at all. This battle will also at least start during the day to create some visual contrast with the earlier battle. I would also add that Jon and Dany had armor made for the dragons before the Battle of Winterfell due to the disaster north of the Wall from the previous season, something that they definitely should have done to avoid shit like this. The Night King and his army arrive, bringing with them the cold winds, and the battle begins. In this battle, Jon has elected to stay on the ground due to Rhaegal's injuries from the last confrontation, and also because he's just more useful down there. Dany will be flying around on Drogon, trying to use his fire to take out as many of the enemy as possible. As the battle intensifies, we see Euron's fleet beginning to move closer to the shore and arming their scorpions. We cut to Jaime, who has made his way into the Red Keep. He finds Cersei watching the war unfold from her window and approaches her. Send out their armies to fight the dead, he asks. She, of course, resists and tells him that the Golden Company will be marching out, but not to fight the army of the dead. Jaime protests, trying to explain to the folly of this decision. The living are already outnumbered. The dead won't discriminate once they've killed the army of Northerners and Targaryen supporters, and the Golden Company will just cause the dead's victory to come more quickly. Cersei, of course, knows this, but doesn't care. She has a ship tucked away at the base of the keep, meant to smuggle herself out of Westeros. I know this war is lost, she says. I'll let the dead and the Dragon Queen kill each other and escape this place. I'm sailing east. You could come with me and raise our child. Back on the battlefield, our heroes are being pushed closer and closer to the walls of King's Landing. Things are looking dire, and the city gates open to reveal the Golden Company marching towards the rear lines of Jon and Dany's army. The rear of the army turns to face this new threat, and the battle begins on its second front. We, of course, get some cool action moments sprinkled throughout the battle as Jon, Davos, Grey Worm, and others do everything they can to take on the walkers and their soldiers. Euron's scorpions continue their bombardment of Dany's forces, trying to hit the dragons, and then, finally, some good fortune arrives. One of Euron's ships is eviscerated by scorpion bolts, and we cut to see Yara and her stolen ship sailing into the bay to engage Euron's fleet. Then, the city bells start to ring, and what's left of the Lannister army begins pouring out from the gate. At the head of the army is Jaime, and he leads the charge into the Golden Company, taking them by surprise and changing the tide of this front of the battle. Now, maybe you can even have the song Reigns of Castamere playing in the background, but maybe switch to a more heroic major key just to, go with the theme. Jaime managed to recruit his family's army away from his sister to help with the final battle. This now makes the often criticized journey north of the Wall mean a lot more, as Jaime was won over by it and eventually able to make a concrete difference in the War for the Dawn. More on this note later. Jaime and his forces move through the makeshift camp and arm themselves with dragon glass weapons. Jaime manages to rendezvous with Tyrion and Jon, and Dany lands to speak with them. They discuss their options and try to think of a way to lure the Night King out again so they can end the battle. At this time, Arya and the Hound take an opportunity of the open gate to march into the city to complete their respective vendettas. This will play out in a similar fashion to the way it goes in the real show's 5th episode as well, but will feature a longer final conversation between the two to really drive the point of that conversation home. As all this is happening, we start to see green explosions springing up throughout the city, much to the horror of everyone, Jaime being maybe the most horrified of all. Turns out Cersei had rigged the city to blow using the Mad King's caches of wildfire with a few additions of her own, once she realized there was no winning this fight. This will allow Arya the chance to run through the city trying to save people as she did originally, but this time without blatantly character assassinating Dany. Now go back to the Greyjoy battle happening in the bay and see that the water has started to freeze over, locking the ships in place. I kind of want to create conditions like the end of The Witcher 3 where Geralt and Ciri are fighting off members of the Wild Hunt on a frozen sea. I just think it'd be pretty epic to have Euron and Yara have their final showdown here. So that will be playing out over the back half of the episode as well. During the fight, Yara will at one point get the upper hand and slice Euron's eye as a little wink to his appearance in the books. I'll also have Euron lose this fight, but manage to slip away. We can have Clegane Bowl play out more or less the same, as it was kind of epic. I'm not sure I'd even definitively include this or whether or not I think the Hound needs to die here, but I'll throw it in as a possibility. Back on the main battlefield, things are not looking super great, but Jon sees an opening to go for the Night King. He charges towards him and Ghost runs alongside, taking out Whites as they try and stop Jon. I feel like never seeing Jon and Ghost fight together was a little bit of a missed opportunity in the show, so I'm putting it here. So, we get the duel between Jon and the Night King. Now, this can be as epic of a fight as you want it to be. I'll leave that to your imagination. But the fight ends with the Night King dropping a massive blow on Jon that sends him flying back several meters. He's not mortally wounded, but he is hurt. Ghost rushes to defend him, and Jon slowly tries to stand and defend himself. Dany sees all this from above on Drogon and sends him into a dive to rescue Jon. The Night King takes notice and launches a spear at Drogon, piercing his shoulder at the base of his wing. Drogon falls from the sky and Dany lands in between Jon and the Night King. We cut back to Cersei as she reaches her escape boat only to see that it has been frozen in the ice. Her only plan ruined, she breaks. We see her in pain and see her sympathetic side at the end here just as we did originally, but this time she's not being crushed by rubble at the same time. She's just out of ideas. Back on the battlefield, Jon has since been engaged by a couple walkers and is blocked from protecting his queen. We cut around the battlefield and see the desperation for all our heroes. Everyone looks to be making their last stand. The Night King marches forward towards Dany. The only one with an opening is Jaime. We see him recognize this. He swallows and, without hesitation, charges at the Night King to defend the daughter of the king he once killed. He gets in range to make the kill, but the Night King turns at the last second, grabs him by the throat, and stabs him in the gut. Jaime looks down sadly as he comes to terms with the end of his life. Then he smiles slightly and stabs the Night King with his Valyrian sword. The Night King shatters, followed by the rest of his walkers. The Whites collapse to the ground. Jaime falls to the ground as well, and Brienne runs over to him from where she had been fighting. He tries to speak, but only manages to get out 2 words, "I'm sorry." Then, in Brienne's arms, Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, dies. Tyrion runs over and sees that his brother has fallen. Sadly, Tyrion never gets to say goodbye to Jaime. He breaks down similarly to how he did in the actual show. Jon and Dany stand together several steps back, looking at the scene in front of them in sadness at their friend Tyrion's loss. We pan out to see the survivors in front of the burning King's Landing, and this is how we end Episode 5. We begin with the mass funeral that previously took place outside of Winterfell. We have similar emotional beats to the original with the addition of our extra losses from the subsequent battles. Cersei has been captured and is put on trial after the funeral, which, courtesy of Tyrion, she was allowed to attend. Tyrion requests that she not be killed, as even though she is totally a bad person, she's the only family he has left. And on top of that, she's pregnant. Dany agrees to let her live, but strips her of name, lands, and titles. Arya's final journey is the same, where she leaves to become an explorer. Depending on whether or not the Hound survived his duel, he can join her too. At this point, I would have Dany realize that breaking the wheel and sitting the Iron Throne in the traditional way are inherently contradictory goals, and she pledges to use her power as monarch to restructure the systems of power and government in Westeros. Sansa will make her claim at the secession of the North, which Dany will decline, as she says she will need the help of the Lady of Winterfell to build a new world, and she cannot have one of the Seven Kingdoms remain stuck in the old ways if the other six are to progress. Sansa reluctantly agrees to this reasoning and accepts the title of Lady of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Once this element is settled, Grey Worm and Missandei approach Dany with their own proposal. They want to take the Unsullied and return east to Essos. There are still many in the east whose chains remain unbroken, and the Unsullied wish to continue the liberation work they were doing before they sailed west. Dany bids her friends and many soldiers farewell. Now, for our final departure, Jon. He has come to realize that his true lineage is actually a threat to Dany's claim and what she wants to build using that claim. To eliminate this problem, he says he will once again take the Black, surrendering all land and titles. He also says that he wishes to help the Free Folk re-establish the homes they lost to the White Walkers. Dany is conflicted, as she appreciates what he is doing, and that he is doing this for her, but is also upset that he will no longer be by her side. She asks if there even still is a Night's Watch, to which Jon replies that there will always need to be a place for cripples, bastards, and broken things, as he exchanges a knowing look with Tyrion. He also mentions that kings and queens have been known to visit Castle Black from time to time. We can have Bran go back north as well with Jon. I'll be honest, I don't really know what to do with him other than to have him warging things during the season, but this seems fine. We end our time in King's Landing with a small council scene comparable to the one we had in the original show, but with Dany as queen and with the addition of Varys as Master of Whispers, since I chose not to have him killed. We cut between each of the Starks, setting out on their adventures as we originally did, but we also add Dany's coronation in there as well. End episode 6 and the series. And so that's it. That's my critique and how I would wrap up Game of Thrones. Now, I'm sure there are a ton of problems in my version as well that I didn't think of, but overall, I think what I came up with would have at least satisfied me. Please, though, let me know your thoughts in the comments below about what I wrote and what I critiqued. I'm really interested to hear it. I'm also fully aware that I didn't write anything. I put together a Word doc with a bunch of bullet points of what I wanted the story to be. Actually, writing a screenplay is far different and more difficult, so I'm not saying I would do a better job than the writers. That would be pretty arrogant of me. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my critique and my reworking of the last season of Game of Thrones. Took me long enough to finish, didn't it? But I really enjoyed putting this together. It was a lot of fun. If you did like it, maybe drop a like or subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate that. And until next time, everybody, have a good one.